Question 1. The investigation demonstrates that a senior engineer at Vestas Wind Systems has been approached by a former colleague, now working for a competitor, who is requesting access to proprietary technical specifications for a new turbine model that is still under development. The former colleague claims this information is for research purposes and assures the engineer that it will not be used competitively. Option A. Ignore the request, assuming the former colleague will not pursue it further. Option B. Share the requested technical specifications with the former colleague, trusting their assurance that the information will only be used for research. Option C. Share a redacted version of the technical specifications, believing this would satisfy the request without revealing critical details. Option D. Refuse to share the confidential information and immediately report the request and the circumstances to Vestas Wind Systems Compliance Department. The correct answer is D. Refuse to share the confidential information and immediately report the request and the circumstances to Vestas Wind Systems Compliance Department. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves a potential conflict of interest and the obligation to act with integrity, which are core ethical principles in any professional setting, including Vestas Wind Systems. The employee is privy to sensitive information that could impact the company's competitive position, and is being asked to leverage this information in a way that could be perceived as unethical or even illegal. Careful judgment is required to navigate this situation without compromising personal integrity or violating company policy and relevant regulations. The correct approach involves refusing to share the confidential information and reporting the request to the appropriate internal channels, such as a compliance officer or legal department. This upholds the duty of confidentiality and loyalty owed to Vestas Wind Systems. It aligns with general principles of business ethics that prohibit the misuse of proprietary information and the exploitation of insider knowledge for personal gain or the benefit of third parties. While specific Vestas Wind Systems policies would be paramount, this approach is universally recognized as the ethically sound and legally prudent course of action. An incorrect approach would be to share the information, even if the employee believes it will not cause significant harm or if they feel pressured. This action would constitute a breach of confidentiality and potentially violate laws related to trade secrets and unfair competition. It demonstrates a lack of integrity and could lead to severe repercussions for the employee and the company. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the request without reporting it. While this avoids direct complicity, fails to address the unethical behavior, and leaves the company vulnerable to potential harm if the individual making the request seeks the information elsewhere or from another employee. This inaction can be seen as a failure to act in the best interest of the company. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical conduct and adherence to company policies and regulations. This involves 1. Identifying the ethical issue and potential conflicts. 2. Understanding relevant policies, laws, and ethical codes. 3. Evaluating the potential consequences of different actions. 4. Seeking guidance from appropriate internal resources when in doubt. 5. Acting with integrity and transparency. Question 2. The analysis reveals that a key potential client for Vestas Wind Systems, during preliminary discussions for a significant wind farm project, has offered to provide Vestas with confidential details about the bidding strategies and financial expectations of its competitors. This information, if acted upon, could significantly enhance Vestas's chances of winning the contract. What is the most ethically sound and professionally responsible course of action for the Vestas representative in this situation? Option A. Accept the confidential information and use it discreetly to refine Vestas's bid, ensuring that the final proposal appears competitive on its own merits. Option B. Inform the potential client that Vestas is willing to consider the information if it is made public or available to all bidders equally, and then proceed with preparing a bid based on publicly available data. Option C. Politely decline the offer of confidential information, clearly stating that Vestas adheres to fair competition principles and does not utilize such information, and then report the incident internally to the compliance department for guidance. Option D. Immediately withdraw from the bidding process for this project to avoid any potential ethical compromise without reporting the offer. The correct answer is C. Politely decline the offer of confidential information, clearly stating that Vestas adheres to fair competition principles and does not utilize such information, and then report the incident internally to the compliance department for guidance. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's immediate financial interests with its long-term ethical obligations and regulatory compliance. Vestas Wind Systems, as a global leader in wind energy, operates within a complex regulatory environment that emphasizes transparency, fair competition, and environmental responsibility. The decision-maker must navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure that all actions align with Vestas's code of conduct and relevant industry standards, which are often underpinned by principles of integrity and sustainability. The pressure to secure a significant contract can create an environment where shortcuts or ethically questionable decisions might seem appealing, but adherence to ethical principles and regulatory frameworks is paramount to maintaining trust and long-term viability. The correct approach involves a thorough and objective assessment of the situation, prioritizing transparency and adherence to Vestas's internal policies and relevant industry best practices. This means gathering all necessary information, consulting with legal and compliance departments, and making a decision based on merit and ethical considerations, rather than undue influence. Specifically, it requires Vestas to act with integrity, ensuring that any proposal submitted is competitive and based on genuine capabilities and fair pricing, without resorting to unethical tactics. This aligns with the principles of fair competition and responsible business conduct expected of a company like Vestas, and upholds its reputation. An incorrect approach that involves accepting the offer of insider information from the potential client's employee is ethically flawed and potentially illegal. This constitutes a breach of fair competition laws and Vestas's own ethical guidelines, as it provides an unfair advantage and undermines the integrity of the bidding process. Such an action could lead to severe reputational damage, legal penalties, and the disqualification of Vestas from the contract. Another incorrect approach, which is to immediately reject the offer of information without further investigation or consultation, might seem cautious but could also be professionally suboptimal. While it avoids the immediate ethical pitfall, it misses an opportunity to understand the nature of the information and to reinforce Vestas's commitment to ethical conduct through proper channels. A more robust approach would involve acknowledging the offer, clearly stating Vestas's policy against receiving such information, and reporting the incident to the appropriate internal departments for guidance and potential action. A third incorrect approach, which is to use the information discreetly to improve the bid without explicitly acknowledging its source, is a form of deception. This still leverages an unfair advantage gained through unethical means. It violates the principle of transparency and fair play, and if discovered, would have the same severe consequences as directly soliciting or accepting insider information. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Recognize the ethical or regulatory issue. 2. Gather all relevant facts and context. 3. Consult internal policies, codes of conduct, and relevant regulations. 4. Seek advice from legal, compliance, or ethics departments. 5. Evaluate potential courses of action based on ethical principles, regulatory requirements, and company values. 6. Choose the option that upholds integrity, transparency, and fairness. 7. Document the decision-making process and the rationale. 8. Communicate the decision and its justification appropriately. Question 3. The performance metrics show a significant increase in project completion delays for Vestas Wind Systems' recent offshore wind farm installations. Considering the company's commitment to transparent stakeholder communication and adherence to financial reporting standards, which of the following approaches best reflects professional and regulatory best practices? Option A. Postpone the release of detailed performance metrics until the majority of delayed projects are back on track to avoid negative investor perception. Option B. Highlight only the successful project completions and the positive financial outcomes, while briefly mentioning that some projects experienced minor scheduling adjustments without elaborating on the extent or reasons for these adjustments. Option C. Reevaluate the definition of project completion to exclude projects that have experienced delays, thereby presenting a more favorable completion rate in internal and external reports. Option D. Present a comprehensive report detailing the project delays, including their root causes, impact on project timelines and budgets, and the mitigation strategies being implemented by Vestas Wind Systems. The correct answer is D. Present a comprehensive report detailing the project delays, including their root causes, impact on project timelines and budgets, and the mitigation strategies being implemented by Vestas wind systems. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Vestas Wind Systems, as a publicly traded company, has a duty to its shareholders to maintain accurate and transparent financial reporting. The performance metrics, if manipulated or misrepresented, could lead to significant financial consequences, regulatory penalties, and reputational damage. The challenge lies in balancing the desire to present positive results with the absolute requirement for integrity and adherence to accounting standards. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any reporting reflects the true financial health of the company, even if it means acknowledging less favorable outcomes. The correct approach involves a thorough and objective review of the performance metrics, ensuring they are calculated and presented in accordance with Vestas Wind Systems' established accounting policies and relevant financial reporting standards. This approach is correct because it upholds the principles of financial integrity and transparency, which are fundamental to investor confidence and regulatory compliance. Specifically, it aligns with the overarching principles of financial reporting that require accuracy, completeness, and fair presentation of financial information. By focusing on the actual performance and adhering to established accounting practices, this approach avoids misleading stakeholders and potential breaches of financial regulations. An incorrect approach that involves selectively highlighting positive metrics while downplaying or omitting negative ones fails to provide a true and fair view of the company's performance. This constitutes a misrepresentation of financial information, which can lead to violations of financial reporting regulations and ethical breaches. Such selective reporting erodes trust with investors and can result in significant penalties if discovered by regulatory bodies. Another incorrect approach, which is to adjust the calculation of metrics to artificially inflate positive results, is a direct violation of accounting principles and potentially fraudulent. This action undermines the credibility of Vestas Wind Systems' financial statements and exposes the company and its management to severe legal and regulatory repercussions, including fines and sanctions. A further incorrect approach, which is to delay the reporting of performance metrics until a more favorable period, can also be problematic. While not always explicitly illegal, it can be considered misleading if it creates an inaccurate impression of current performance and can violate disclosure requirements if material information is being withheld without proper justification. This can also lead to a loss of investor confidence and potential regulatory scrutiny for noncompliance with timely disclosure obligations. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a commitment to ethical conduct and a thorough understanding of applicable financial reporting standards. When faced with performance data that may be unfavorable, professionals should 1. Seek to understand the underlying reasons for the performance. 2. Ensure all calculations and reporting are compliant with established accounting policies and regulatory requirements. 3. Consult with internal audit, legal counsel, or external auditors if there is any uncertainty about the appropriate reporting treatment. 4. Prioritize transparency and accuracy in all communications with stakeholders, even when the news is not entirely positive. Question 4. To address the challenge of potential stakeholder opposition and misinformation surrounding a new wind farm development, what is the most effective and ethically sound approach for Vestas Wind Systems to manage communications with local communities, environmental advocacy groups, and investors? Option A. Withhold detailed information regarding potential environmental challenges and focus solely on highlighting the economic benefits of the wind farm to manage public perception. Option B. Prioritize communication efforts primarily towards investors, providing them with optimistic project updates while minimizing detailed engagement with local communities and environmental groups. Option C. Rely exclusively on generic, pre-approved press releases disseminated through mass media, without actively seeking or responding to specific inquiries from individual stakeholder groups. Option D. Proactively engage with all identified stakeholder groups through tailored communication channels, providing clear, factual information about the project's environmental impact assessments, mitigation strategies, and community benefit initiatives. The correct answer is D. Proactively engage with all identified stakeholder groups through tailored communication channels, providing clear, factual information about the project's environmental impact assessments, mitigation strategies, and community benefit initiatives. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Vestas Wind Systems employee tasked with managing stakeholder communication regarding a new wind farm project. The challenge lies in balancing the need for transparency and accurate information dissemination, with the potential for misinformation or negative sentiment to arise from various stakeholder groups, including local communities, environmental organizations, and investors. Mismanaging these communications can lead to project delays, reputational damage, and strained relationships, all of which have significant financial and operational implications for Vestas. Careful judgment is required to identify the most effective and ethically sound communication strategy. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves proactively engaging with all identified stakeholder groups through tailored communication channels, providing clear, factual information about the project's environmental impact assessments, mitigation strategies, and community benefit initiatives. This approach is justified by Vestas' commitment to responsible development and adherence to relevant environmental regulations and corporate social responsibility (CSR) guidelines. By fostering open dialogue and addressing concerns directly, Vestas demonstrates transparency and builds trust, which is crucial for project success and long-term stakeholder relationships. This aligns with principles of good corporate governance and ethical business practices, ensuring that all parties are informed and have an opportunity to voice their perspectives. Incorrect approach is analysis. An approach that prioritizes only investor relations and downplays concerns raised by local communities or environmental groups is ethically flawed. It fails to acknowledge the legitimate interests of all stakeholders and can lead to accusations of corporate negligence or disregard for environmental and social impacts. This can result in regulatory scrutiny, legal challenges, and significant reputational damage, undermining the project's viability. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on generic, pre-approved press releases without actively seeking feedback or addressing specific questions from different stakeholder groups. This lack of tailored engagement can be perceived as dismissive and may fail to adequately address the unique concerns of each group, leading to misunderstandings and increased skepticism. Finally, an approach that involves withholding or selectively releasing information to manage public perception, rather than providing a comprehensive and honest account, is a clear ethical and potentially regulatory failure. This can erode trust, lead to accusations of deception, and result in severe consequences for Vestas' reputation and legal standing. Professional reasoning. Professionals at Vestas should adopt a stakeholder-centric communication framework. This involves 1. Stakeholder identification and analysis. Clearly identify all relevant stakeholder groups and understand their interests, concerns, and potential impact on the project. 2. Tailored communication strategy. Develop communication plans that are specific to each stakeholder group, using appropriate channels and language. 3. Transparency and accuracy. Ensure all information shared is factual, up-to-date, and presented transparently, including potential challenges and mitigation efforts. 4. Proactive engagement. Initiate communication rather than waiting for issues to arise. Actively solicit feedback and be prepared to address concerns constructively. 5. Ethical compliance. Ensure all communication adheres to Vestas' ethical code of conduct, relevant environmental regulations, and principles of corporate social responsibility. Question 5. The review process indicates that Vestas Wind Systems has experienced a slight underperformance in achieving its projected installation targets for a specific quarter due to unforeseen supply chain disruptions. In communicating this to stakeholders, what is the most appropriate approach to ensure compliance with regulatory frameworks and ethical standards? Option A. Delay the release of the quarterly performance report until all supply chain issues are fully resolved and installation targets are met, to avoid negative stakeholder perception. Option B. Focus solely on the successful completion of other projects and highlight future growth opportunities, while briefly mentioning the installation target shortfall as a minor, external issue. Option C. Provide a detailed report that acknowledges the underperformance in installation targets, clearly explains the impact of the supply chain disruptions, outlines steps being taken to mitigate future risks, and provides updated projections. Option D. Emphasize the company's overall strong financial position and positive market outlook, suggesting that the installation target is not a critical performance indicator for Vestas wind systems. The correct answer is B. Focus solely on the successful completion of other projects and highlight future growth opportunities, while briefly mentioning the installation target shortfall as a minor, external issue. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire for positive public perception and the need for transparent, accurate reporting of operational performance, especially in a highly regulated industry like renewable energy. Vestas Wind Systems, as a publicly traded entity, is subject to stringent reporting requirements and ethical obligations to its stakeholders, including investors, regulators, and the public. The challenge lies in balancing the communication of progress and achievements with the disclosure of setbacks or underperformance, ensuring that all communications are truthful and not misleading. The correct approach involves a commitment to transparent communication, acknowledging both successes and challenges in a balanced and factual manner. This aligns with regulatory frameworks that mandate accurate financial and operational reporting and ethical guidelines that emphasize honesty and integrity. By providing a comprehensive overview that includes explanations for any deviations from targets, Vestas demonstrates accountability and builds trust with its stakeholders. This approach is ethically sound as it upholds the principle of truthfulness and is legally compliant by adhering to disclosure requirements. An incorrect approach would be to selectively highlight positive outcomes while downplaying or omitting negative performance indicators. This could involve framing underperformance in a way that obscures the true extent of the issue or focusing solely on future potential without addressing current shortcomings. Such an approach risks misleading stakeholders, potentially violating regulations that prohibit deceptive practices or material omissions. Ethically, it breaches the duty of candor and can erode trust, leading to reputational damage and potential legal repercussions. Another incorrect approach might be to attribute all underperformance to external, uncontrollable factors without acknowledging any internal operational issues that may have contributed. This demonstrates a lack of accountability and can hinder the identification and resolution of systemic problems. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes accuracy, transparency, and accountability. This involves a thorough internal review to understand the root causes of performance deviations, consulting with legal and compliance teams to ensure adherence to all regulatory disclosure obligations, and developing communication strategies that are factual, balanced, and clearly explain any variances. The focus should always be on providing stakeholders with the information they need to make informed decisions, rather than on managing perceptions through selective disclosure. Question 6. What factors determine the most appropriate communication strategy for Vestas wind systems when a critical component delivery for a major offshore wind farm project is unexpectedly delayed, impacting the overall project timeline and budget? Option A. The urgency of informing the client and other affected stakeholders about the delay, the potential impact on the project timeline and budget, and the proposed mitigation strategies. Option B. The potential impact of the delay on Vestas' short-term financial performance and the likelihood of securing future contracts with the same client. Option C. The extent to which the delay can be concealed or minimized in initial communications to avoid immediate client dissatisfaction and potential penalties. Option D. The internal team's ability to resolve the component issue before officially notifying any external parties. The correct answer is A. The urgency of informing the client and other affected stakeholders about the delay, the potential impact on the project timeline and budget, and the proposed mitigation strategies. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge for Vestas Wind Systems employees due to the inherent conflict between commercial interests and the ethical imperative to accurately report project status. Pressure to meet deadlines and secure future business can create an environment where stakeholders might be tempted to downplay or omit negative information. Careful judgment is required to navigate these pressures and ensure transparency and integrity in all communications. The correct approach involves proactively identifying and communicating potential risks and delays to all relevant stakeholders, including clients, investors, and internal management, in a timely and transparent manner. This aligns with principles of good corporate governance and ethical business conduct, which mandate honest and accurate reporting. Specifically, adherence to Vestas' internal code of conduct and any applicable industry best practices for project management and stakeholder communication would necessitate this open approach. It fosters trust, allows for collaborative problem solving, and mitigates potential reputational damage or contractual disputes that could arise from concealed issues. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate commercial gain by withholding or misrepresenting negative project information would constitute a significant ethical failure. This could lead to breaches of contract, damage to Vestas' reputation, and potential legal repercussions if clients or investors suffer financial losses due to reliance on inaccurate reporting. Another incorrect approach, focusing solely on internal targets without considering the impact on external stakeholders, demonstrates a lack of comprehensive stakeholder management and could alienate clients and partners, jeopardizing long-term relationships and future opportunities. Finally, an approach that delays reporting until issues are fully resolved, rather than providing interim updates, fails to uphold the principle of timely communication and can create an information vacuum that breeds speculation and distrust. Professionals at Vestas should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical conduct and stakeholder interests. This involves a continuous assessment of project progress against stated objectives, a commitment to open and honest communication channels, and a willingness to escalate potential issues promptly. When faced with conflicting pressures, professionals should refer to Vestas' ethical guidelines and seek counsel from legal or compliance departments to ensure decisions are both commercially sound and ethically defensible. Question 7. The risk matrix shows a potential for significant visual impact and noise pollution from a new Vestas wind farm development in a rural area with established residential communities and protected natural habitats. Considering the company's commitment to sustainable development and adherence to UK environmental and planning regulations, which approach best addresses these identified risks from a stakeholder perspective? Option A. Initiate immediate, open dialogue with local community representatives and environmental groups to collaboratively explore design modifications, noise mitigation technologies, and visual screening options, while also engaging proactively with the relevant planning authorities to ensure full compliance with UK planning policy and environmental protection legislation. Option B. Implement the minimum legally required noise reduction measures and visual impact assessments, and inform the local community of the project's progress only when construction is imminent. Option C. Commission a further, more detailed study on the visual and noise impacts, delaying the project indefinitely until absolute certainty regarding mitigation effectiveness is achieved, without engaging directly with stakeholders during this period. Option D. Proceed with the development as planned, relying on existing environmental impact assessments to satisfy regulatory requirements, and address any community complaints on a reactive basis. Correct answer is D. Proceed with the development as planned, relying on existing environmental impact assessments to satisfy regulatory requirements, and address any community complaints on a reactive basis. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because Vestas Wind Systems, as a global leader in wind energy, operates within a complex web of stakeholder interests and regulatory environments. Balancing the immediate financial implications of a project with long-term environmental stewardship and community relations requires careful judgment. The risk matrix highlights potential negative impacts, necessitating a proactive and ethically sound response that considers all affected parties. The correct approach involves prioritizing transparent communication and collaborative problem-solving with local communities and regulatory bodies. This aligns with principles of corporate social responsibility and good governance, which are increasingly embedded in regulatory frameworks and industry best practices. Specifically, engaging with stakeholders to understand their concerns and jointly developing mitigation strategies demonstrates a commitment to sustainable development and builds trust, which is crucial for long-term project success and regulatory compliance. This proactive engagement can prevent escalation of issues, avoid costly delays, and maintain Vestas' reputation. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on minimizing immediate project costs without adequate stakeholder consultation risks violating environmental regulations and community engagement guidelines. Such an approach could lead to legal challenges, fines, and significant reputational damage. Another incorrect approach that involves delaying or withholding information from regulatory bodies or local communities is unethical and likely contravenes disclosure requirements, potentially resulting in severe penalties and loss of operating licenses. A third incorrect approach that dismisses community concerns as mere opposition without investigation fails to acknowledge the legitimate rights and interests of stakeholders, undermining the principles of fairness and respect that underpin ethical business conduct and regulatory expectations. Professionals at Vestas should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the identified risks and their potential impact on all stakeholders. This should be followed by an assessment of relevant regulatory obligations and ethical considerations. The next step involves actively seeking input from affected parties, exploring various mitigation and engagement strategies, and selecting the option that best balances project objectives with stakeholder well-being and regulatory compliance. Continuous monitoring and adaptive management are also key components of this process. Question 8. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of significant ecological disruption during the construction phase of a new Vestas wind systems offshore wind farm project in a sensitive marine environment. The project is crucial for meeting renewable energy targets and has strong investor backing, but local fishing communities have expressed concerns about potential impacts on their livelihoods and marine biodiversity. Which of the following approaches best reflects Vestas Wind Systems' commitment to responsible stakeholder management and regulatory compliance in this scenario? Option A. Proceed with the project as planned, focusing on contractual obligations and relying on standard environmental impact assessments, while addressing community concerns only if they escalate to formal complaints. Option B. Publicly emphasize the project's economic benefits and renewable energy contributions, while providing minimal, standardized information about potential environmental risks to satisfy basic regulatory disclosure. Option C. Proactively engage with local fishing communities and environmental groups to collaboratively develop and implement enhanced environmental mitigation measures, and transparently communicate the risk assessment and mitigation plan to all stakeholders. Option D. Immediately halt the project to conduct a more extensive, long-term study, even though this would significantly delay the project and incur substantial financial penalties, to fully appease all potential concerns. The correct answer is C. Proactively engage with local fishing communities and environmental groups to collaboratively develop and implement enhanced environmental mitigation measures, and transparently communicate the risk assessment and mitigation plan to all stakeholders. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because Vestas Wind Systems, as a global leader in wind energy, operates within a complex web of stakeholder interests and regulatory environments. Balancing the immediate financial implications of a project with long-term environmental stewardship and community relations requires careful judgment. The risk matrix highlights potential negative impacts, necessitating a proactive and responsible approach to mitigation. The correct approach involves prioritizing stakeholder engagement and transparent communication regarding the identified environmental risks. This aligns with principles of corporate social responsibility and good governance, which are increasingly embedded in regulatory frameworks and industry best practices. Specifically, it reflects a commitment to ethical business conduct by acknowledging potential harm and seeking collaborative solutions. This approach fosters trust with local communities, regulatory bodies, and investors, ultimately contributing to the long-term sustainability and reputation of Vestas. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on minimizing immediate project costs without adequately addressing the environmental risks fails to meet regulatory expectations for environmental impact assessment and mitigation. This could lead to regulatory penalties, project delays, and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach that involves downplaying or omitting critical environmental risks from stakeholder communications constitutes a breach of transparency and potentially violates disclosure requirements, eroding trust and leading to legal or ethical repercussions. A third incorrect approach that prioritizes short-term public relations over substantive risk mitigation may appease stakeholders temporarily, but does not address the root causes of the risks, leaving Vestas vulnerable to future issues and regulatory scrutiny. Professionals at Vestas should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the identified risks and their potential impact on all stakeholders. This involves consulting relevant environmental regulations and industry standards. The next step is to engage with affected stakeholders to understand their concerns and gather input on potential mitigation strategies. Based on this input and regulatory requirements, a comprehensive risk mitigation plan should be developed and communicated transparently. This iterative process ensures that decisions are informed, ethical, and aligned with both regulatory obligations and the company's commitment to sustainable development. Question 9. The risk matrix shows a potential for significant disruption to local wildlife habitats during the construction phase of a new Vestas wind systems turbine installation. Which approach best aligns with regulatory expectations and stakeholder interests for managing this risk? Option A. Proceed with construction as planned, relying on standard environmental protection measures, and address any wildlife disruption issues if they arise during the construction period. Option B. Minimize public disclosure of the potential wildlife disruption risk to avoid unnecessary community concern and regulatory scrutiny. Option C. Allocate a small contingency fund to address potential wildlife damage and focus primarily on meeting the project's construction timeline and budget. Option D. Implement enhanced environmental monitoring protocols and engage in proactive consultation with local wildlife experts and environmental agencies to develop and implement mitigation strategies before construction begins. The correct answer is D. Implement enhanced environmental monitoring protocols and engage in proactive consultation with local wildlife experts and environmental agencies to develop and implement mitigation strategies before construction begins. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because Vestas Wind Systems, as a global leader in wind energy, operates within a complex web of stakeholder interests and regulatory expectations. Balancing the immediate financial implications of a project with long-term environmental stewardship and community relations requires careful judgment. The risk matrix highlights potential negative impacts, necessitating a proactive and responsible approach to stakeholder engagement and project execution. The correct approach involves prioritizing transparent communication and collaborative problem-solving with affected communities and regulatory bodies. This aligns with principles of corporate social responsibility and good governance, which are increasingly embedded in regulatory frameworks governing large infrastructure projects. Specifically, it reflects a commitment to understanding and mitigating potential environmental and social impacts, fostering trust, and ensuring compliance with relevant environmental and planning laws. This proactive engagement demonstrates a commitment to sustainable development and responsible business practices, which are crucial for maintaining Vestas' reputation and long-term license to operate. An approach that focuses solely on minimizing immediate project costs without adequately addressing community concerns or environmental risks would be ethically and regulatorily unsound. Such an approach could lead to project delays, legal challenges, reputational damage, and ultimately, higher long-term costs due to remediation or loss of public support. Ignoring the concerns of local communities or regulatory bodies, or attempting to circumvent established environmental impact assessment processes, constitutes a failure to uphold ethical business conduct and could violate specific environmental protection legislation and planning regulations. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the risks identified in the matrix as minor or unsubstantiated without thorough investigation and consultation. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for potential negative consequences, which is contrary to the principles of risk management and responsible project development expected by regulators and stakeholders. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic evaluation of identified risks, considering their potential impact on all stakeholders, including the environment and local communities. This should be followed by a proactive engagement strategy that involves open dialogue, information sharing, and a genuine effort to incorporate feedback into project planning and mitigation measures. Adherence to relevant environmental regulations, planning laws, and ethical codes of conduct should guide every decision, ensuring that Vestas operates as a responsible corporate citizen. Question 10. The assessment process reveals that Vestas Wind Systems is expanding its operations into a new region with distinct data privacy laws. A project team is tasked with engaging local community stakeholders to gather input on a new wind farm development. The team is considering different approaches to collecting and using stakeholder contact information and feedback. which approach best balances Vestas' operational needs with the regulatory and ethical obligations concerning stakeholder data. Option A. Collect only basic contact information and avoid gathering detailed feedback to minimize data privacy concerns, even if it limits the project team's understanding of stakeholder perspectives. Option B. Collect all available stakeholder contact information and feedback without explicit consent, assuming it will be used solely for project communication and internal analysis, and rely on general company privacy policies. Option C. Use publicly available contact information for stakeholders and infer consent for project-related communication based on their public presence, without direct engagement or explicit permission. Option D. Proactively inform stakeholders about the types of data being collected, the specific purposes for which it will be used, e.g., project updates, feedback incorporation, and obtain their explicit consent before collecting any personal information or detailed feedback. The correct answer is B. Collect all available stakeholder contact information and feedback without explicit consent, assuming it will be used solely for project communication and internal analysis, and rely on general company privacy policies. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Vestas Wind Systems, as a global company, operates within diverse regulatory environments. Navigating these differing legal and ethical landscapes, particularly concerning stakeholder engagement and data privacy, requires a nuanced understanding of compliance. The core difficulty lies in applying a consistent yet adaptable approach to stakeholder communication and data handling that respects both Vestas' internal policies and the specific legal obligations of each operating jurisdiction. Careful judgment is essential to avoid legal repercussion, reputational damage, and erosion of stakeholder trust. The correct approach involves a proactive and transparent engagement strategy that prioritizes obtaining explicit consent for data usage, aligning with the principles of data protection regulations such as the GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, if operating within the EU, or equivalent legislation in other jurisdictions. This approach acknowledges that stakeholders have a right to control their personal information and understand how it will be used. By clearly communicating the purpose of data collection and seeking informed consent, Vestas demonstrates a commitment to ethical data stewardship and builds stronger, more trusting relationships with its stakeholders. This aligns with the spirit of regulatory frameworks that emphasize accountability and transparency in data processing. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on internal company policy, without considering external regulatory requirements, would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a lack of jurisdictional awareness, potentially leading to breaches of data privacy laws and significant legal penalties. Another incorrect approach, which involves using stakeholder data for purposes not originally disclosed or consented to, represents a direct violation of ethical principles and regulatory mandates around informed consent and purpose limitation. This erodes trust and can result in severe reputational damage. A third incorrect approach, which is to delay or avoid responding to stakeholder inquiries about data usage, demonstrates a lack of transparency and accountability, contravening the principles of good corporate governance and regulatory compliance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the relevant jurisdictions and their specific legal and ethical requirements. This should be followed by an assessment of Vestas' internal policies and their alignment with these external mandates. The next step involves developing communication and data handling protocols that are compliant with the strictest applicable regulations, while also reflecting Vestas' commitment to ethical business practices. Regular training and updates for employees on these protocols are crucial to ensure consistent application. Finally, a mechanism for ongoing review and adaptation to evolving regulatory landscapes is essential for sustained compliance and stakeholder confidence. Question 11. The risk matrix shows a potential for significant disruption to migratory bird routes due to the proposed Vestas Wind Systems turbine installation in a sensitive ecological area. Which stakeholder engagement and mitigation approach best aligns with Vestas' commitment to sustainable development and regulatory compliance? Option A. Proceed with the project as planned, relying solely on internal environmental assessments and implementing generic, low-cost mitigation measures that do not significantly alter the project timeline or budget. Option B. Initiate immediate construction while concurrently developing a reactive communication plan to address any public outcry regarding bird migration. Option C. Postpone the project indefinitely until all potential environmental concerns are definitively resolved, without engaging with stakeholders on interim solutions. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive environmental impact assessment. Engage proactively with local ornithological societies and community representatives to co-develop adaptive mitigation strategies, and transparently report findings and actions. The correct answer is B. Initiate immediate construction while concurrently developing a reactive communication plan to address any public outcry regarding bird migration. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because Vestas Wind Systems, as a global leader in wind energy, operates within a complex web of stakeholder interests and regulatory expectations. Balancing the immediate financial implications of a project with long-term environmental stewardship and community relations requires careful judgment. The risk matrix highlights potential negative impacts, necessitating a proactive and responsible approach to stakeholder engagement and mitigation. The correct approach involves proactively engaging with local communities and environmental groups to understand their concerns regarding potential impacts on migratory bird routes, and to collaboratively develop mitigation strategies. This aligns with Vestas' commitment to sustainable development and responsible business practices, which are increasingly codified in international guidelines and national environmental regulations that emphasize stakeholder consultation and impact assessment. Ethical considerations also demand transparency and a genuine effort to address legitimate concerns, fostering trust and ensuring the long-term social license to operate. An incorrect approach would be to prioritize the project's immediate economic benefits and dismiss community concerns as mere opposition. This fails to acknowledge the regulatory requirement for environmental impact assessments and public consultation, which are standard in most jurisdictions where Vestas operates. Ethically, it demonstrates a disregard for the well-being of local ecosystems and the rights of affected communities, potentially leading to significant reputational damage, legal challenges, and project delays. Another incorrect approach would be to implement superficial mitigation measures without genuine consultation or a deep understanding of the specific ecological risks. This approach, while appearing to address concerns, lacks the substantive engagement and adaptive management required by environmental regulations and ethical best practices. It risks being perceived as tokenism, further eroding trust and failing to achieve meaningful risk reduction. A further incorrect approach would be to solely rely on internal risk assessments without seeking external validation or input from affected parties. While internal assessments are crucial, they may not capture the full spectrum of stakeholder concerns or the nuanced ecological impacts. Regulatory frameworks often mandate independent assessments and public comment periods to ensure comprehensive risk evaluation and to build consensus. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the identified risks and the relevant regulatory landscape. This involves actively seeking diverse stakeholder perspectives, evaluating potential impacts against established environmental and social standards, and developing mitigation strategies that are both effective and ethically sound. Transparency, open communication, and a commitment to continuous improvement are paramount in navigating such complex situations. Question 12. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a key supplier to Vestas Wind Systems has offered a senior procurement manager a significant personal gift during a critical contract negotiation. The procurement manager has a close personal friendship with the supplier's representative. What is the most appropriate course of action for the procurement manager to take? Option A. Ignore the offer and continue with the negotiation as planned, assuming the personal relationship will not influence their professional judgment. Option B. Accept the gift, as it is a common practice in some business cultures and could help foster a positive working relationship with the supplier. Option C. Accept the gift but ensure it is not used for personal benefit, instead donating it to a company-sponsored charity to avoid any appearance of impropriety. Option D. Politely decline the gift. Inform the supplier that such offers are inappropriate during negotiations, and immediately report the offer and the personal relationship to their line manager and the compliance department for guidance, and to ensure proper conflict of interest procedures are followed. The correct answer is D. Politely decline the gift. Inform the supplier that such offers are inappropriate during negotiations, and immediately report the offer and the personal relationship to their line manager and the compliance department for guidance and to ensure proper conflict of interest procedures are followed. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Vestas Wind Systems, as a global company, must navigate complex ethical considerations and potential conflicts of interest when engaging with suppliers. The challenge lies in balancing the need for efficient procurement and strong supplier relationships with the imperative to uphold integrity and avoid even the appearance of impropriety. A robust decision-making framework is crucial to ensure compliance with Vestas' internal policies and any relevant regulatory guidelines that govern business conduct and anti-corruption. The correct approach involves a structured and transparent process for evaluating and managing potential conflicts of interest. This approach prioritizes adherence to Vestas' established code of conduct and any applicable anti-bribery and corruption laws. It requires proactive identification of potential conflicts, thorough documentation of the evaluation, and seeking appropriate internal approvals before proceeding. This ensures that decisions are made in the best interest of Vestas, free from undue influence or personal gain, and aligns with principles of good corporate governance and ethical business practices. An incorrect approach that involves accepting the supplier's offer without further scrutiny fails to recognize the potential for a conflict of interest. This could lead to decisions being influenced by personal relationships rather than objective business criteria, potentially resulting in unfavorable terms for Vestas, or even violating anti-bribery regulations if the offer is perceived as an inducement. Another incorrect approach, which is to immediately reject the supplier due to the perceived conflict without a proper evaluation, might be overly cautious and could damage a valuable supplier relationship unnecessarily. A prudence is important. A blanket rejection without understanding the nature and materiality of the potential conflict may not be the most effective or proportionate response. It misses an opportunity to manage the risk appropriately. Finally, an incorrect approach that involves downplaying the significance of the relationship and proceeding without formal documentation or approval risks creating an environment where conflicts of interest are not adequately managed. This can erode trust within the organization and with external stakeholders, and may leave Vestas vulnerable to regulatory scrutiny if a conflict later arises and is found to have been improperly handled. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that includes 1. Identifying potential conflicts of interest. 2. Assessing the materiality and nature of the conflict. 3. Consulting relevant internal policies and external regulations. 4. Documenting the assessment and any mitigation strategies. 5. Seeking appropriate internal approvals and guidance. 6. Implementing agreed-upon mitigation measures or making a decision based on objective business criteria. Question 13. Compliance review shows that a Vestas Wind Systems procurement manager is evaluating bids for a significant component supply contract. The manager discovers that one of the bidding companies is owned by a close personal friend with whom they have a long-standing relationship, including recent social interactions. The manager has not previously disclosed this relationship. Which of the following approaches best upholds Vestas Wind Systems' ethical and operational integrity in this situation? Option A. Immediately halt the evaluation of the specific supplier's bid and report the potential conflict of interest to the Vestas Wind Systems Compliance Department for guidance on how to proceed. Option B. Proceed with the evaluation, but make a note in the internal documentation that the supplier is owned by a personal acquaintance, without further disclosure or seeking guidance. Option C. Continue the evaluation process discreetly, ensuring the decision is objective and based solely on the merits of the bids, without mentioning the personal relationship. Option D. Inform the bidding company's representative about the personal relationship to ensure transparency from their side before proceeding with the evaluation. The correct answer is C. Continue the evaluation process discreetly, ensuring the decision is objective and based solely on the merits of the bids, without mentioning the personal relationship. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Vestas Wind Systems, as a global company, must navigate complex ethical considerations and potential conflicts of interest when engaging with suppliers who may also be involved in other business ventures. The core difficulty lies in ensuring that procurement decisions are based solely on merit, quality, and fair pricing, and are not influenced by personal relationships or potential future business opportunities that could compromise Vestas' integrity and competitive advantage. Careful judgment is required to maintain transparency and uphold the company's commitment to ethical business practices. The correct approach involves a proactive and transparent disclosure process by immediately reporting the potential conflict of interest to the relevant internal compliance department. The employee demonstrates adherence to Vestas' internal policies and ethical guidelines. This allows the company to formally assess the situation, implement appropriate mitigation strategies, such as recusal from decision-making or enhanced oversight, and ensure that the procurement process remains unbiased. This aligns with general principles of corporate governance and ethical conduct, which mandate the identification and management of conflicts of interest to protect the company's interests and maintain stakeholder trust. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the supplier evaluation without disclosure, hoping the personal connection does not influence the decision. This fails to acknowledge the inherent risk of unconscious bias and violates the principle of transparency. Ethically, it creates an appearance of impropriety, even if no actual wrongdoing occurs. Legally and regulatorily, it could lead to accusations of favoritism, unfair competition, and potential breaches of procurement regulations if they exist within Vestas' operational jurisdictions. Another incorrect approach is to downplay the relationship, believing it is insignificant. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of how even minor personal connections can be perceived as influential and can erode trust. It bypasses the established internal controls designed to prevent such issues and leaves Vestas vulnerable to reputational damage and potential regulatory scrutiny. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to delay reporting until after a decision has been made. This suggests an attempt to conceal the potential conflict or to present a fait accompli, which is ethically unsound and undermines the integrity of the internal review process. It also makes it more difficult for Vestas to take corrective action if necessary, potentially leading to more severe consequences. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, adherence to internal policies, and proactive risk management. When faced with a potential conflict of interest, the immediate steps should be: 1. Identify the potential conflict. 2. Consult relevant company policies and codes of conduct. 3. Disclose the conflict to the appropriate internal authority, e.g., compliance, legal, or management. 4. Follow the guidance provided by the company to manage or mitigate the conflict. This systematic approach ensures that ethical standards are maintained and that business decisions are made impartially. Question 14. Stakeholder feedback indicates a potential technical issue with a recently deployed wind turbine model that could impact its long-term performance. As a Vestas Wind Systems project manager, what is the most appropriate initial step to take? Option A. Share the feedback and preliminary assessment with a select group of key investors to manage expectations. Option B. Immediately issue a public statement acknowledging the feedback and outlining preliminary mitigation steps. Option C. Conduct a thorough internal investigation to verify the feedback, assess its materiality, and consult with legal and compliance teams before any external communication. Option D. Disregard the feedback as it is not yet confirmed and could be based on isolated incidents. The correct answer is B. Immediately issue a public statement acknowledging the feedback and outlining preliminary mitigation steps. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Vestas Wind Systems, as a publicly traded company, operates under strict regulatory scrutiny regarding its financial reporting and stakeholder communications. The challenge lies in balancing the need to address legitimate stakeholder concerns with the imperative to avoid premature or misleading disclosures that could violate securities regulations or damage investor confidence. Careful judgment is required to determine the appropriate timing and content of information dissemination. The correct approach involves a structured, internal review process that adheres to Vestas' established disclosure policies and relevant regulatory frameworks. This approach prioritizes accuracy, completeness, and compliance by first gathering all pertinent facts, assessing their materiality, and consulting with legal and compliance teams. Vestas ensures that any public statement is well-informed and legally sound. This aligns with the principles of fair disclosure and investor protection mandated by securities laws, which require companies to communicate material non-public information, in a manner that prevents selective disclosure and market manipulation. An incorrect approach that immediately releases preliminary findings without thorough verification risks violating regulations that prohibit the dissemination of false or misleading information. This could lead to regulatory penalties, shareholder lawsuits, and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach, which is to ignore the feedback entirely, demonstrates a disregard for stakeholder engagement and could be interpreted as a failure to address potential material issues, potentially leading to regulatory scrutiny for non-compliance with disclosure obligations or market abuse rules. Finally, selectively disclosing information to a subset of stakeholders before a broader, regulated release would constitute selective disclosure, a serious breach of fair disclosure principles and securities regulations. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with acknowledging and documenting all stakeholder feedback. This should be followed by an objective assessment of the feedback's potential implications, including its materiality. The next step involves consulting internal policies and relevant regulatory guidance, and then engaging with appropriate internal departments, e.g., legal, compliance, investor relations, to determine the most compliant and ethical course of action. This systematic process ensures that decisions are not made in haste or based on incomplete information, thereby safeguarding the company's integrity and regulatory standing. Question 15. Risk assessment procedures indicate a potential delay in the delivery of critical components for a new Vestas wind systems offshore wind farm project due to unforeseen logistical challenges. The project manager is considering authorizing the use of an alternative, less tested shipping route that is faster but carries a higher risk of adverse weather exposure and potential damage to the components. The project manager must decide whether to proceed with the alternative route or to absorb the delay and use the standard, safer route. Option A. Immediately proceed with the alternative shipping route to avoid any delay, assuming the risks are manageable and the project timeline is paramount. Option B. Inform the client of the delay and request an extension to the project deadline without exploring any alternative shipping options. Option C. Authorize the use of the alternative shipping route, documenting the decision and the rationale for accepting the increased risk, while also initiating enhanced monitoring protocols for the shipment. Option D. Authorize the use of the alternative shipping route without further documentation or consultation, prioritizing speed over potential risks. Correct answer is C. Authorize the use of the alternative shipping route, documenting the decision and the rationale for accepting the increased risk, while also initiating enhanced monitoring protocols for the shipment. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires Vestas wind systems to balance the immediate need for operational efficiency with its long-term commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. The pressure to meet project deadlines can create a temptation to overlook potential risks or to adopt shortcuts that might not fully align with established procedures or ethical standards. Careful judgment is required to ensure that decisions are not solely driven by expediency, but are grounded in a robust risk assessment and adherence to the company's internal policies and relevant regulatory frameworks. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented review of the identified risks, engaging relevant stakeholders, and seeking expert advice before making a decision. This ensures that all potential impacts, including safety, environmental, and reputational, are thoroughly considered. Regulatory and ethical justification for this approach stems from the fundamental principles of due diligence, accountability, and responsible corporate behavior. Companies are expected to proactively identify and mitigate risks, and to operate in a manner that upholds legal requirements and ethical standards. This approach demonstrates a commitment to transparency and a structured decision-making process, which are hallmarks of good corporate governance and essential for maintaining trust with stakeholders and regulatory bodies. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate cost savings without a comprehensive risk assessment fails to meet the standards of due diligence. This could lead to unforeseen liabilities, safety incidents, or environmental damage, all of which carry significant regulatory penalties and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach that relies solely on the judgment of a single individual, without consulting relevant departments or seeking expert input, bypasses essential checks and balances. This increases the likelihood of overlooking critical risks or making decisions that are not aligned with the company's overall risk appetite or regulatory obligations. Such an approach undermines the principle of collective responsibility and can lead to inconsistent or flawed decision-making. Professionals at Vestas Wind Systems should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the problem and the potential risks. This should be followed by the identification and evaluation of alternative courses of action, considering their potential consequences against established criteria, including regulatory compliance, ethical implications, and business objectives. The chosen course of action should be implemented, and its effectiveness monitored. This iterative process ensures that decisions are well-informed, defensible, and aligned with the company's commitment to responsible operations. Question 16. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a long-standing supplier to Vestas Wind Systems has offered a significant, unsolicited discount on a critical component, citing a personal friendship with a Vestas procurement manager. The procurement manager is aware of this relationship. What is the most appropriate course of action for the procurement manager to ensure ethical and compliant procurement practices at Vestas Wind Systems? Option A. Inform their direct supervisor and the relevant compliance department about the offer and the personal relationship, and recuse themselves from any further decision-making regarding this supplier's offer until a formal, objective review process is completed. Option B. Discuss the offer informally with a trusted colleague in another department to gauge their opinion before deciding whether to accept or decline. Option C. Decline the offer outright due to the potential conflict of interest, without further investigation into the merits of the discount. Option D. Immediately accept the discounted offer to secure cost savings for Vestas, as the personal relationship is secondary to the business benefit. Correct answer is D. Immediately accept the discounted offer to secure cost savings for Vestas, as the personal relationship is secondary to the business benefit. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Vestas Wind Systems, as a global company, must navigate complex ethical considerations and potential conflicts of interest when engaging with suppliers. The challenge lies in ensuring that procurement decisions are based on objective criteria and not influenced by personal relationships or undue pressure, thereby upholding the company's integrity and compliance with its own code of conduct and any applicable regulatory frameworks governing fair business practices. The need for a robust decision-making framework is paramount to prevent even the appearance of impropriety. The correct approach involves a structured, documented process that prioritizes objective evaluation and transparency. This means adhering strictly to Vestas' established procurement policies, which likely mandate competitive bidding, clear evaluation criteria, and disclosure of any potential conflicts of interest. By formally documenting the decision-making process and seeking independent review where necessary, Vestas ensures that its actions are defensible, ethical, and compliant with principles of good corporate governance and fair competition, which are often implicitly or explicitly required by regulatory bodies overseeing business conduct and anti-corruption. An incorrect approach that involves accepting the supplier's offer without a formal review process fails to uphold due diligence. This could lead to accusations of favoritism, potentially violating internal policies and external regulations related to fair procurement and anti-bribery. Another incorrect approach, which is to dismiss the offer solely based on the personal relationship without considering its merits, is also problematic. While avoiding conflicts is important, it can also lead to suboptimal business decisions if a potentially valuable supplier is overlooked due to an overly cautious or poorly defined conflict of interest policy. Finally, an approach that involves seeking informal advice from a colleague without proper documentation or adherence to policy bypasses establishes controls and introduces subjectivity, increasing the risk of noncompliance and reputational damage. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the potential ethical and compliance risks. This involves understanding Vestas' internal policies, relevant industry best practices, and any applicable legal or regulatory requirements. The framework should then guide the professional to gather objective information, evaluate options against predefined criteria, document all steps and decisions, and seek appropriate approvals or independent review when conflicts or significant risks are identified. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are not only sound from a business perspective, but also ethically defensible and compliant. Question 17. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a key supplier for Vestas Wind Systems has offered a senior procurement manager a significant personal gift during ongoing contract renewal negotiations. The gift is presented as a token of appreciation for past business. The procurement manager is aware that this supplier is one of several competing for the renewed contract, and their bid is not the lowest. How should the procurement manager proceed to uphold Vestas' ethical standards and regulatory compliance? Option A. Accept the gift and postpone the decision on contract renewal until after the gift has been fully appreciated. Option B. Accept the gift and inform the supplier that their bid will be given special consideration due to the gesture. Option C. Politely decline the gift. Inform the supplier that all procurement decisions are based on objective criteria and company policy, and report the offer to the compliance department. Option D. Accept the gift, as it is a gesture of goodwill and unlikely to influence the final decision, and continue with the negotiations as normal. The correct answer is C. Politely decline the gift. Inform the supplier that all procurement decisions are based on objective criteria and company policy, and report the offer to the compliance department. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Vestas Wind Systems, as a global company, must navigate complex ethical considerations and potential conflicts of interest when engaging with suppliers. The challenge lies in ensuring that procurement decisions are based on objective criteria, such as quality, cost, and sustainability, rather than personal relationships or undue influence. Maintaining the integrity of the supply chain and upholding Vestas' reputation for ethical business practices are paramount. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between legitimate business interactions and actions that could be perceived as compromising impartiality or leading to unfair advantages. The correct approach involves a structured, transparent, and documented process for evaluating and selecting suppliers. This approach prioritizes objective criteria and ensures that any potential conflicts of interest are identified and managed according to Vestas' internal policies and relevant regulatory frameworks. By adhering to a predefined decision-making framework, Vestas can demonstrate its commitment to fair competition, ethical conduct, and robust governance. This aligns with general principles of good corporate governance and ethical business conduct expected of publicly traded companies, which often have codes of conduct and supplier policies designed to prevent corruption and ensure fair dealing. An incorrect approach that involves accepting a significant gift from a potential supplier, even if framed as a gesture of goodwill, poses a significant ethical and regulatory risk. This action could be interpreted as an attempt to influence the procurement decision, creating a perception of bias and potentially violating anti-bribery and corruption laws or internal company policies. Such an action undermines the principle of fair competition and could lead to reputational damage for Vestas. Another incorrect approach, which is to overlook the potential conflict of interest and proceed with the supplier selection without disclosure or mitigation, is also professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to adhere to ethical standards. It creates an environment where decisions might be influenced by factors other than merit, potentially leading to suboptimal outcomes for Vestas and exposing the company to legal and reputational risks. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of Vestas' code of conduct, procurement policies, and any applicable anti-corruption regulations. When faced with a potential conflict of interest or an offer of a gift, professionals should 1. Identify the potential conflict or ethical concern. 2. Consult internal policies and guidelines. 3. Seek guidance from their manager or the compliance department. 4. Document all actions and decisions. 5. Prioritize transparency and impartiality in all business dealings. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are made ethically, legally, and in the best interest of Vestas. Question 18. The audit findings indicate a recurring performance anomaly in a specific wind turbine model operated by Vestas Wind Systems. A site manager, under pressure to restore optimal energy output, has proposed immediate adjustments to the turbine's control software based on initial, unverified sensor readings that suggest a specific component is failing. What is the most appropriate decision-making approach for the Vestas technical team to adopt in this situation? Option A. Proceed with the proposed software adjustments immediately to address the performance anomaly and restore optimal energy output. Option B. Initiate a formal investigation to verify the accuracy of the sensor readings, analyze historical performance data, and consult relevant technical documentation before proposing any corrective actions. Option C. Escalate the issue to senior management for an immediate decision on whether to halt operations of the affected turbine model. Option D. Implement a temporary workaround by manually adjusting operational parameters for the affected turbines, deferring a full investigation until a later date. The correct answer is A. Proceed with the proposed software adjustments immediately to address the performance anomaly and restore optimal energy output. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for information to address a critical operational issue with the obligation to maintain data integrity and adhere to established reporting protocols. Vestas Wind Systems, as a global entity, operates under a framework of internal policies and potentially external regulatory guidelines that govern how operational data is collected, verified, and disseminated. The pressure to resolve a performance issue quickly can lead to shortcuts that compromise accuracy, potentially leading to misinformed decisions, reputational damage, or non-compliance if the data is used for external reporting or regulatory submissions. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the pursuit of a solution does not undermine the foundational principles of reliable data management. The correct approach involves initiating a formal, documented investigation process that prioritizes data verification before drawing conclusions or taking corrective actions. This approach upholds the integrity of Vestas' operational data, ensuring that any subsequent decisions are based on accurate and reliable information. This aligns with general principles of good corporate governance and internal control, which mandate that operational data used for decision-making must be accurate, complete, and timely. While specific Vestas internal policies are not provided, a responsible approach would involve consulting those policies for guidance on data validation and incident reporting. Ethically, this approach demonstrates a commitment to transparency and accountability. An incorrect approach would be to immediately implement changes based on anecdotal evidence or preliminary, unverified data. This fails to address the root cause of the performance issue and could introduce new problems or mask the real issue. It violates the principle of data integrity and could lead to inefficient resource allocation. Another incorrect approach would be to bypass standard reporting channels to expedite a solution. This undermines internal control mechanisms, creates a risk of information silos, and prevents a comprehensive understanding of the issue across relevant departments. It also risks violating any internal policies that mandate specific reporting procedures for operational anomalies. A third incorrect approach might be to attribute the issue to a single, unconfirmed factor without thorough investigation. This premature conclusion can lead to misdirected efforts and a failure to identify the true cause, potentially impacting Vestas' overall operational efficiency and reliability. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with clearly defining the problem and identifying all relevant stakeholders. Next, they should gather all available information, critically assessing its source and reliability. This should be followed by identifying potential solutions and evaluating them against established criteria, including adherence to company policy, ethical considerations, and potential impact. Finally, the chosen solution should be implemented with a plan for monitoring its effectiveness and making adjustments as needed. In this scenario, the framework would guide the individual to prioritize data verification and a structured investigation before proposing or implementing any solutions. Question 19. Operational review demonstrates that a critical component supplied to a major Vestas wind systems project is not meeting the stringent quality specifications outlined in the contract and potentially contravening local environmental regulations regarding material sourcing. The project deadline is imminent, and sourcing an alternative component would cause significant delays and financial penalties. Option A. Proceed with the installation of the non-compliant component to meet the project deadline, with a plan to address the quality and regulatory issues retrospectively after project completion. Option B. Immediately escalate the issue to the relevant internal compliance and legal departments, providing all available documentation, and recommend a course of action that prioritizes regulatory adherence and contractual obligations, even if it impacts the project timeline. Option C. Continue with the project as planned, assuming the minor deviation in component quality will not be detected and therefore will not lead to any regulatory or contractual repercussions for Vestas wind systems. Option D. Discreetly inform the supplier of the noncompliance and instruct them to provide a falsified certificate of conformity to avoid immediate project disruption. The correct answer is B. Immediately escalate the issue to the relevant internal compliance and legal departments, providing all available documentation, and recommend a course of action that prioritizes regulatory adherence and contractual obligations, even if it impacts the project timeline. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge for Vestas Wind Systems employees due to the inherent conflict between achieving business objectives and adhering to ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. The pressure to meet targets can create an environment where shortcuts or questionable practices might seem appealing, but such actions carry significant risks, including legal penalties, reputational damage, and erosion of stakeholder trust. Careful judgment is required to navigate these pressures responsibly. The correct approach involves prioritizing transparency and adherence to Vestas Wind Systems' internal policies and relevant regulatory frameworks, even if it means a temporary delay or a less favorable immediate outcome. This approach upholds the company's commitment to ethical business practices and regulatory compliance, which are fundamental to long-term sustainability and stakeholder confidence. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and the legal obligations to operate with integrity. An incorrect approach that involves overlooking or downplaying potential regulatory breaches to meet immediate targets is professionally unacceptable. This failure to report or address issues promptly can lead to severe legal repercussions for Vestas Wind Systems, including fines and sanctions, and can also result in individual disciplinary action. Furthermore, such a disregard for compliance erodes the company's ethical standing and can damage its reputation among investors, customers, and the public. Another incorrect approach that involves seeking to conceal or misrepresent information to avoid scrutiny is also professionally unsound. This constitutes a breach of trust and can be considered fraudulent activity, leading to severe legal consequences and personal liability. It directly contravenes the principles of honesty and integrity expected of all employees. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Identify the core issue and potential risks, including regulatory and ethical implications. 2. Consult relevant internal policies, codes of conduct, and applicable regulations. 3. Seek guidance from supervisors, legal counsel, or compliance officers if uncertainty exists. 4. Prioritize ethical conduct and regulatory compliance over short-term gains. 5. Document all decisions and actions taken. 6. Report any observed or suspected noncompliance through appropriate channels. Question 20. Quality control measures reveal that raw operational data from Vestas Wind System recent wind farm installations, which includes performance metrics and maintenance logs, is being directly accessed and analyzed by the product development team to identify areas for improvement in turbine design. This raw data contains project-specific details and potentially identifiable information related to the client's operational sites. What is the most appropriate course of action for Vestas Wind Systems to ensure compliance and ethical data handling? Option A. Continue the current practice, as the product development team's analysis is intended to improve Vestas's products, which ultimately benefits the clients through better performance and reliability. Option B. Request the product development team to manually redact any obviously sensitive information from the raw data before proceeding with their analysis. Option C. Inform the product development team to proceed with their analysis, but to be mindful of not sharing any client-specific details externally, assuming internal use is permissible. Option D. Immediately halt all product development team access to the raw data. Implement a robust data anonymization and aggregation process for performance metrics and maintenance logs, and review all client contracts for specific data usage clauses before any further analysis. Correct answer is D. Immediately halt all product development team access to the raw data. Implement a robust data anonymization and aggregation process for performance metrics and maintenance logs, and review all client contracts for specific data usage clauses before any further analysis. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because Vestas Wind Systems, as a global company, must navigate varying regulatory landscapes and ethical expectations regarding data privacy and intellectual property. The core tension lies in balancing the need for internal operational efficiency and product improvement with the legal and ethical obligations to protect sensitive customer data and proprietary information. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with all applicable laws and to maintain customer trust. The correct approach involves a multifaceted strategy that prioritizes data anonymization and aggregation before any analysis, coupled with strict adherence to contractual agreements and data protection regulations. This approach is best professional practice because it directly addresses the legal and ethical imperative to safeguard customer data. By anonymizing and aggregating data, Vestas minimizes the risk of exposing personally identifiable information, PI, or confidential project details, thereby complying with data protection principles such as data minimization and purpose limitation. Furthermore, referencing and adhering to specific contractual clauses with clients ensures that Vestas is operating within the agreed-upon parameters for data usage, upholding contractual integrity and avoiding breaches of confidentiality. This aligns with principles of responsible data stewardship and builds long-term trust with clients. An incorrect approach that involves direct analysis of raw, unanonymized customer project data without explicit consent or contractual authorization would constitute a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This would likely violate data protection laws, such as GDPR, if applicable to the data's origin or processing location, by failing to obtain adequate consent or legal basis for processing PII. It also represents a breach of confidentiality and potentially intellectual property rights, damaging client relationships and exposing Vestas to legal repercussions and reputational harm. Another incorrect approach, which is to assume that all data collected is automatically usable for any internal purpose without review, overlooks the critical need for compliance checks. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the legal frameworks governing data usage. It fails to acknowledge that data, even if collected for one purpose, may have restrictions on its use for other purposes, especially when it pertains to specific client projects. A third incorrect approach, focusing solely on the technical feasibility of data analysis without considering the legal and ethical implications, is also professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a narrow, operational mindset that neglects the broader responsibilities of a global corporation. It prioritizes internal goals over external legal obligations and ethical considerations, leading to potential noncompliance and significant risk. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a robust risk assessment framework. This framework should include 1. Identifying the type of data involved and its potential sensitivity. 2. Determining the applicable legal and regulatory requirements based on data origin, processing location, and client jurisdiction. 3. Reviewing contractual obligations with clients regarding data usage and confidentiality. 4. Implementing appropriate data governance policies, including anonymization, aggregation, and access controls. 5. Seeking legal counsel when uncertainties arise regarding data handling and usage. This systematic approach ensures that all relevant legal, ethical, and contractual considerations are addressed before proceeding with any data analysis or utilization.